Hello guys, my name is SVB and I'm back with another video. And today I'd like to welcome you to the first episode in a new series that I'm calling SVB's Simplified series. And the purpose of the series is quite simple, as the name suggests. I'm just going to be trying to break down some concepts that the community in general talks about or that pro players talk about, but not everybody really knows what they mean. So I just want to try and give a simple and easy explanation for all the kind of concepts that we might hear about. And what better place to start than with the dominant meta at the moment, and that is GOATs. That's right guys, I know some of you hate it, some of you love it, but it's important to know about it either way. So just a running order, I'm going to start with some really basic stuff and then move on to the more advanced things. So I'm going to start by telling you what GOATs is, what's good about it, what's bad about it. Then we're going to move into what each hero's role is in GOATs and what they're supposed to do. And then finally, I'm going to break down a pro scrim from a couple weeks ago that Jane hosted, and he was kind enough to leave the comms in for the first match so we could hear what the pros were saying and how they go about playing GOATs. So I'll be breaking that down so you guys know what you should be doing in your matches, whether that's your pugs, your scrims, or your ladder play. And timestamps for all this will be below. So without any more time wasting, let's get to it guys. So GOATs, it's all we hear about these days. But what is GOATs? So GOATs is the comp known as Reinhardt, Zarya, D.VA, Brigette, Lucio, and Zenyatta. This combined is the comp known as GOATs, 3 tanks, 3 healers. Now why is GOATs so strong? So there's a lot of pros to GOATs, and there's a reason why it's the strongest comp right now in the game. Partly it's because it's super hard to break down. With all the large HP pools and all the large amount of healing, it's really tough to actually pick people off and kill them. And it can output a lot of damage, so it doesn't really have too many weaknesses. It's also the best comp to win vanilla, i.e. without ults. Now one of the reasons it gets a lot of hate is because it's a comp that doesn't require too much technical ability. And that's no disrespect to the comp, and you shouldn't be afraid to play it because even the pros play it, and these are the most skilled players of Overwatch in the world, and they don't have any shame in playing GOATs, so neither should you. But it isn't a comp that requires a lot of aim per se, and it is a very accessible comp, so you can play this from bronze all the way up to GM to top 500 to semi-pro. And it is an excellent comp to steamroll because you can really cycle the ults very easily. And like I said, if it's already good without ults, then when you do get ults, it's going to be even better if you can ration them out. Now, what's bad about GOATs? So it does require a lot of coordination, and I know that there's an opinion in the community that GOATs is really easy and anybody without a brain can play it. But particularly when you're up against a good team, and particularly in the GOATs v GOATs matchups, it is a comp that really requires strong coordination, and the team with the better cohesiveness and the better things that I'm going to talk about later in the video, ult tracking, ability tracking, these are the things that wins you the fights. So it does require a lot of micromanagement, but for that same reason, it also becomes quite a boring viewing experience, because when you watch people play GOATs, you don't get the insight into what they're actually doing behind the scenes. You don't get to hear the callouts. You don't get to actually understand the strategy behind. You just see a gigantic death ball bashing against another gigantic death ball, and that's not really what any of us came to see. But that's where understanding the intricacies of GOATs really makes you appreciate it, and that's why I'm really thankful for that Jane organized those pro scrims that I'm going to break down later. Now if you want to play GOATs, you obviously need to know your role in GOATs. So I'm just going to run through now what each hero is doing and what they're supposed to do in an ideal GOAT setup. So we'll start with Reinhardt, the big scary German guy, kind of the focal point of GOATs. Now in a GOATs v GOATs guys, you want to kill the enemy Reinhardt before your Reinhardt dies, and the team that kills the enemy Reinhardt quicker usually wins the fight. So in that sense, if you're playing Reinhardt, it's very important to understand the balance between shielding and protecting and hammering and being aggressive, because Rein is one of the main damage dealers in GOATs. But you definitely don't want to just charge in past your team, because if you get out of position or if you die needlessly, you're really going to leave your team in a bad position. So keep your shield up while you can, have your Lucio speed boost your team into the right position, and then when you're within fighting range, when you're within that brawling range, that's when you can start swinging your hammer, get those meaty melees into the 3, 4, 5 characters of the enemy team, build your ult really quickly, and with the Brigette brawling next to you, the Lucio aura, it should be really easy to sustain yourself through all that damage. Now as a main tank, it's also your job to do a lot of the call out, although the in-game leader should be the Lucio, and I'll get to that later. But you should be a very vocal member of the team, calling out what you're going to do, what you want to do, because you're going to be the furthest ahead character in the game. Now it's also Ryan's job to enable and block a lot of combos in GOATs, so I'll just run through that quickly. Now obviously all these combos usually originate around the grav, So when a grab goes down, the best combo using goats is the grab into D.Va bomb. So as Reinhardt, you need to wait till the last second and then charge the enemy Reinhardt out of the grab, thus denying the enemy team a shield and allowing your D.Va to hit that big bomb. And similarly, if there is a bomb coming your way, or if there's a grab bomb coming your way, you do need to try as Reinhardt to keep your shield up, because without your shield your team is almost certainly going to die. Now next up is Zarya. And now I just said that the team whose Rein usually dies first is the team that's going to lose the fight. And usually what defines whether a Rein lives or dies is the Zarya behind them. And you know the saying, guys, behind every great Rein is a great Zarya. So your job as Zarya is to just try and keep everybody else alive as well. And that's where the bubbles are really, really important, guys. The bubble management alone is such a huge factor in a goats versus goats comp, or just even when you're running a goats comp. You really have to time your bubbles correctly. Now I'm going to show you some examples later on of what is good timing to use your bubbles and what's bad timing and what timing gets punished. But in general, these are the principles for Zarya bubbles. Always try and keep one bubble in hand, so don't blow both your bubbles at once, because then the enemy team knows that you don't have any bubbles left and it becomes easy to fight into you. Secondly, you want to start by using your bubbles aggressively and then tone down. So what I mean by that is when you just come out of spawn and when you're just starting your first fight, you want to try and use your bubbles really aggressively. You might even want to walk in front of the Reinhardt and bubble, just so you can get that 40 charge. And you definitely want to shield the Reinhardt when he's maybe eating a fire strike, or maybe when he's going for 1 or 2 swings. That way, you build up to high charge very, very quickly. You can get to 80 really, really quickly. And then from that point on, you output so much damage that you become a real threat for the enemy team to deal with. And that's how you build grabs quickly. Once you get to that stage, you want to start holding back on your bubbles a little bit, because you've already got 100 charge possibly, or 90. And at that point, you don't need to be spamming your bubbles on cooldown, because that extra 10 charge is not worth a lot, but a bubble in hand is worth so much, guys. It could potentially block anything. And on that note, while you generally want to bubble your Reinhardt, the bubble is also a great form of peel. And if one of your supports is ever in trouble, if they're getting dove on, or if they're about to be hit with something, let's say a pulse bomb or a D.Va bomb, the shield from your bubble is a definite lifesaver. So remember to try and keep your supports alive as well as your Reinhardt. It's a tough job to balance, but that's the life of an off tank. And of course, big grabs win fights. Now moving on to D.Va. This is the hardest role for me to describe, because it's also the hardest role to play. Not just in a goats comp, but I would say even generally in a game. D.Va is such a tough character to understand, because it's all about context. It's all about understanding what's going on in your particular game and responding to it in the most optimal way possible. You need to try and balance the peeling to your backline and the shielding to your front line and the aggression as well that D.Va brings. So the reason you pick D.Va is for the 2 simple M's that I've listed here: mobility and matrix. Now D.Va in a goats comp is the only character with any real verticality. Of course you have Lucio, but he can't really leave his team because his team needs him to speed around. So that's where you as D.Va, it becomes your job to contest anybody who's out of position or on high ground that your team can't reach. So if there's a Widowmaker, a Hanzo on a high ground somewhere, an Ashe, or if you see a flanker coming around from one side of your team and nobody else can deal with him because goats relies on being a tight and compact composition, that's where it's your job as D.Va to fly in, deny that out of position character wherever they are. So ideally you want to take favorable one-on-ones and win them, and in that sense you can potentially be a really aggressive D.Va who gets kills for your team. But you also don't have to kill them, you just have to deal with issues that the rest of your team can't deal with. So that's where your mobility comes in, and of course, even with the new nerfs, Defense Matrix is still an amazing ability because you have the potential to eat an infinite amount of damage, even if it's for a very short duration. Now with the new Matrix, I do have a suggestion for any of you D.Vas who are struggling to adapt, and that is to really save your Matrix if you know that something is coming. And that's where game sense as a D.Va is so necessary. And really, it's the #1 defining skill of what a D.Va needs. But what I mean by this is if you know the enemy team has a grav, then you just have to save your defense matrix. You have to watch that Zarya and be ready to hit that matrix as soon as she pops the grab button. Because with this new 2-second cooldown, there's no way you can respond to a grab without anticipating it. So make sure you try and really watch what the Zarya is doing, watch her movement, watch how it changes. If she suddenly becomes more aggressive, it's usually a sign that she's coming out to grab. Now on to the most maligned character in GOATS, and that is Brigette. As a Brigette, your job is relatively simple. You're there to brawl, and you're there to bash. So stay close to your Reinhardt, and when he starts swinging, you start swinging. The two of you combined are going to output lots of damage, and you're going to start healing him and the rest of your team passively. And then on top of that, you have your armor pack for an instant burst of healing. And in goats, that can be quite important because Lucio and Zenyatta don't have any form of burst healing in that sense. So it becomes on you as the Brigette to watch for characters who are getting really low and give them that quick burst to save them, and that can be the difference between that character living and getting kills or that character dying and then the rest of your team dying. So that's really all it takes with Brig in this comp, guys, is be frugal with your abilities. Don't blow them for no reason. The same applies for shield bash, because if you run goats the way I prescribed, you're not going to really have any other crowd control. So the stun can be really important. If, for example, the enemy team has a Doomfist or a Hammond who's rolling into your team, your stun, if you blow it early, you're not going to have to deal with when a threat comes into your team. Now Lucio is really key to a good goats comp. And the irony is that a lot of people think that to play Lucio in goats, all you essentially need to do is have speed boost on and press E occasionally. Now, in a physical sense, that's largely true, and then that's what the main role of the Lucio character is in the game. However, guys, as Lucio, you should be the main shot caller in your team. And the reason for that is that the goats comp relies entirely on the speed boost to move around. Without it, it would be quite easy to deal with because the enemy team can just back up further away from the goats and outrange them. But with the speed boost, it becomes impossible for the enemy team to run far enough away. And so having the shot caller be in control of the speed boost is really important. If someone else is telling you when to speed boost, it can be done, but it becomes suboptimal because that 1 second delay, that 2 second delay between the call going out for a speed boost and the speed boost going down can be the difference between winning or losing. On top of that, you need to be the ult tracker in your team. So keeping tabs of what's been used by the enemies, what they might have in hand, how close they might be to their next ults. All these things are really important as a Lucio. And finally, we move on to Zenyatta. Now as Zenyatta, your job is fairly simple. You harmony your Rein, you discord the enemy Rein, you spam those orbs out. Now of course, you have to use your game sense to sometimes know that it's good to discord someone else or harmony someone else. And that's not something I can really give you a blanket rule to do, that's just something you have to know in game. And the good Zen will also output quite a large amount of damage. And of course, trans is the easy counter to a graviton, provided your team doesn't get anti-nated or your Rein doesn't get charged away and a D.Va bomb comes in and blows you all up. Now, there is a school of thought that likes putting in Ana or Moira in place of the Zen in goats. And I'll just quickly explain why you would do that and why you wouldn't do that. So the main reason you'd pick Ana is simply for the anti-nade. Theoretically, a goats with an Ana can counter a goats with a Zen with a well-timed anti-nade during a trans, and that wins you the fight in the grav. However, the value from a discord orb is constant, and that extra 30% damage can have a long and consistent impact as opposed to one anti-nade into a grav, which is a sort of burst impact. Now Moira is the pick you go for essentially if you want more consistent healing, and maybe you find that you're taking a lot of poke damage and your team isn't even able to stay alive to contest the point. And in that scenario you may want to pick a Moira who does a lot more heals than Zenyatta. But I would still ideally recommend you play Zen in goats, unless you really don't have anybody who's comfortable playing it. And now guys, we're going to see it all in action. So as I mentioned before, these are the pro scrims that Jane organized on his stream, so big shout out to him. Now these are 12 Overwatch League players playing a private game just for a bit of fun and a bit of experimentation. Now bear in mind, these guys are not in the same team, so there is a bit of miscoordination and suboptimal play, but still, I mean, they're way better than any of us, and the kinds of things they're tracking and talking about are really important, and they're the same things you can apply to your game. So I'm just going to let the first fight play out, let you guys listen to what kind of comms are going on, and then I'm going to talk you through exactly what you should be mimicking in your games.
The first, get energy. Okay. Nothing major.
D.Va, yeah, they have goats. Watch out for like a May or something.
I don't think so.
Nothing, yeah.
I can bubble him. Okay,
no,
Go.
They have no bubbles at all. I'm swinging on the break to the right.
Hey, yo, kill the break. I'm
I pinned her.
Okay. Group up. Don't split.
Sorry,
Sorry.
Break on the ground. I got
Behind now. Zen's in.
Yeah, push it. Listen, you can push.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's go.
I'm on Zen.
I hit break half.
Wait, we can just catch point.
Yeah, go point. We gotta heal up.
Oh, fuck, we didn't get a take.
Careful.
Okay, we're gonna rush their spawn in 2 seconds. 3,
Okay. Hold up.
Go.
I'm on the right. Kill Ryan.
I'm alright.
I died.
Ryan 1, Ryan dead. Alright, I'm going.
I'm pretty low, but D.Va's low too.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, fuck.
Okay.
Oh, we fucked up.
Yeah. I actually meant to say our spawn. That was my bad.
Okay guys, so that was a lot of comms, a lot of kind of messy play, messy fight, but you can also see there the detail that goes into a GOATS comp and the real importance of moving together and counting abilities. So let me just talk us through what happened there. So coming out of spawn, the first call out that we hear is check for a Mei, which is obviously smart because on King's Row, Mei is always a viable pick because she can wall off this area once one or two people are through, and then it's easy pickings. So they ask to check for a Mei. When there is no Mei, they go on through. Now you'll notice here that they're tracking the Zarya bubbles, guys. So you can see here, there's one Zarya bubble on Super, who's the blue team's Reinhardt. So the friendly Zarya bubble has been used. And now they see the second Zarya bubble has been used. Just there, by Surefour. And as soon as they realize that both Zarya bubbles are out, so this is what I was talking about with earlier, as you roll a Zarya, you really want to try and cycle your Zarya bubbles better than this. Because the minute they see that both Zarya bubbles are out, they push in, they attack the enemy Ryan aggressively, and it's off screen so you can't quite see it. You can see that Super has been stunned, and they're about to focus him down. He's quite low HP, and he will die quite soon. And from that point on, like I said, you want to focus the enemy Reinhardt. Once he dies, it should be fairly easy to kill the enemy team. So here, after this point, they pin the D.Va, they demech her, but unfortunately, a bit of miscoordination leads to them losing a few members of their team. But again, you can probably hear the faint callouts of Muma shouting Zarya, Zarya, Zarya. So again, it's really important to call out who you're targeting. But here, what they do is that probably because they're not used to playing with each other, 3 members go one way, while the Brigette and Zenyatta were somewhere in this area, and that leaves them in an awkward 4v3 situation where the 3 supports from the blue team are all in behind the red team's spawn, but they decide not to contest because they're better off just capping point. Or at least that's the decision they make. I think ideally they should have gone and wiped those guys. They decide to start capping point. Now an important call out you're about to hear here is that I think it's Bishu who's coordinating this. He tells his team in 3 seconds we're going to speed into the enemy spawn. Now why is this important? If in a game, guys, you have the opportunity to give your team a few seconds warning, that can be huge. Because obviously not everybody's always on the same page. And if you suddenly fly in and then tell your team, oh, I'm going in now, it'll take them 1 or 2 seconds to respond, and that might be the time by which you're dead. So what's really important here is Bishu coordinates the plan and he gives his team fair warning. He says, alright, we're going to speed into the enemy team towards their spawn. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. And then they all go together. And obviously their plan doesn't quite work out because the target of their attack was poorly chosen. However, the execution was correct.
Go, go, go. I'm on the right, kill right, kill right, kill right.
I'm alright.
And again, you can hear they're calling targets. Linkser is telling Muma that he can bubble him, so he's letting him know at all times. Give your team as much information as you can. Okay, I've got bubble for you, Reinhardt, you can go. Okay, I'm charging so-and-so. I've got matrix, I don't have matrix. These are really important pieces of information to convey to your team. Just to try and give them a more full picture rather than just the isolated picture they get as one hero. Now the next fight plays out. And the red team is going to lose this fight because of this huge shatter here from Super.
We're down one.
And although Muma tries to counter shatter, he doesn't really land as big of shatter as he wants to. Only gets 2 people. And the rally from Jake keeps the rest of the blue team alive. Now what's important here, guys, something I want you to listen to. Again, this is a really important part of GOATS. And this is something that you can do in between fights. So just listen out.
Yeah, what did they use? They use rally too. So they have trance, speed, and grab combo.
So you heard there, guys, they're counting ults, and this is really important, and this is what I mentioned earlier. Because even 1 or 2 ults can really swing a GOATS versus GOATS fight. And if you heard them, they perfectly calculated what the enemy team is holding on to. So they knew they'd use the rally, they knew you'd use the shatter. So they obviously clearly knew that by this much time, the enemy team would have built up the rest of their 4 ults. And that's exactly what they have. So in between fights, guys, don't just wall ride and spawn or go out and poke needlessly. This is the time to regroup, reassess, and figure out what the enemy team has and what you're going to do about it. Now, as the next fight starts, you're going to see what I meant about grab combos. So what happens there, guys, the blue team grabs, the red team transcendences to try and save from the raw damage that people put into the grab. But then Spree, the blue team's D.Va, throws their bomb in. Now, as I talked about, the only thing to block the bomb really, theoretically, is a Reinhardt shield. So Super does the right thing, the blue Reinhardt, he charges Muma away, the red team's Reinhardt, denying them with their shield. However, Linkser comes in with the hero play, but you can see here as I just take it back 1 second, that Linkser bubbles himself, and he bubbles the Reinhardt. Essentially what this does is, it creates a second shield that blocks the damage from the D.Va bomb, saving everybody in the trans, and allowing his team to continue the fight. Now from this point on, it's just a good use of their ultimates, and then they steamroll like I talked about. Once you pick off one character in GOATS, it's really easy to start picking off the rest, and they win the fight quite easily. Now the rest of this game is really interesting in the whole series, so if you found this little clip interesting, guys, I really recommend you go out and watch it. There's definitely a lot to learn. But just for the sake of time, I only want to show you one more clip from this game, and what this is going to illustrate is again a few of the combos that you can try and pull off with GOATS, and just shows you how important coordination is, even on the smallest level.
Yeah, back up. I have Shutter as well.
Get their bubble out. Get one more out. Get one more bubble out. I'm ready whenever you are, Muma.
Okay.
So again, Bishu there is coordinating with Muma, Bishu being the D.Va, Muma being the Reinhardt, and he asks for one more bubble, so he says one more Zarya bubble out. Okay, both Zarya bubbles are out, and he tells him, I'm ready whenever you are, Muma, i.e. he's ready to drop his D.Va bomb whenever Muma is ready to shatter. And you're going to see how they try and combo the two ults.
I'm ready as well. Let's go.
So, they drop the D.Va bomb on top to create chaos, to force everybody on one side, and ideally to try and get the Reinhardt to turn his shield so that Muma will get a free shatter. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. As you can see, Super is just watching Muma. Muma shatters, and the only person he gets is one D.Va here. Everybody else is covered from this side. And that combo fails, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. It was a good attempt. It's just that it didn't quite come off in this scenario. What you're going to see now is the blue team pull off a different combo.
Shutter, D.Va's alright. They have Shutter.
We're waiting a beat.
Sorry,
They just have shatter right now. They just have shatter.
Yeah.
Break low.
Break low. Break low.
Brigette. Pushing. Watch the shatter.
Watch like a boot.
So there you heard, you might have heard at least, Muma saying watch for a boop, watch for a boop. And what happens is, Happy, the blue team's Lucio, comes in, he boops Muma in the air, away from the rest of his team. Super lands a big shatter, and theoretically this should be an easy wipe. It doesn't go that way. But again, it was a really nicely coordinated play. And although we can't hear the blue team's comms, you can almost certainly know that they timed that to the perfect second, you know. Alright, I'm gonna boop. Super, I'm gonna boop the enemy Reinhardt away, you shatter, okay? And again, you coordinate, you call out, and you try and give your team a few seconds notice. Okay, 3, 2, 1, I'm gonna do it. And all these things, guys, are really, really important. These are how you gain small advantages that lead to big fight wins. By working together, you can make these huge plays that you would never be able to do on your own. And hopefully, just these couple minutes of clip have illustrated to you the various micro details that go into GOATS. So just to summarize everything we've seen there, guys, the first thing that you'll notice is calling of bubbles. It's probably the most vocal and obvious thing. So call the bubbles. When you see that the Zarya doesn't have any of her bubbles, that's when you go in. And again, that's where a good Zarya will try and rotate to always have one bubble in hand. Call out what abilities you have left. Okay, I have Bash, I have Speed Boost, I have Charge, you know, all these things. I have Matrix. Let your team know, give them as much information as you can, and also give them as much warning as you can if you want them to make a play, or if you're going to try and make a play, just to let them have that extra couple seconds to get themselves mentally ready and in position. Coordinate ults, and there's loads of different combos you can pull off, as you've already seen in that short clip. Call out your targets and focus them together. It's really, really important that if a target is called out, everybody goes on it. It doesn't matter if you're fighting someone else, you have to try and change your attention and focus who your team is going on, because if you get split up, you're going to die. That's just how GOATs work. And finally, recall the ults that you've just used and try and stagger yours out. Try and use as few ults as you can to win a fight, so that you can continually win fight after fight after fight by just always having an ult in hand. So that's all I got for today, guys. I hope you found this video helpful, and hope you found the concept of this video helpful, because if you did, I'd like to continue making videos like this to simplify some of the more complex ideas thrown around in the community and terms thrown in the community, just so that we're all on the same page when we refer to certain things like GOATs. And finally, a bit of housekeeping. I have now created a Patreon account, and there will be a link in the description of this video. And I'd really like to thank all of you who've signed up already. I'm so grateful for your help and your support. And I'd just like to shout out my new patrons. First of all, my top 500 tier patron Freya Stark, and my other patrons Jakal, Nevaki, Volderan, and Venno. I wouldn't be able to make these videos without the support of these guys, and also just the support of all you guys who've been so amazing since the GM and Gold video blew up. So if you like my video, please do like, share, and subscribe. And no pressure, but if you can, any sort of Patreon donations would be really, really appreciated. And either way, I'll be back soon with another video. See you guys around.